This week, tensions between Israel and Iran raised concerns about a wider regional conflict. Questions emerge about America's response to growing instability in the Middle East. The conversation surrounding the 2028 presidential election continues to take shape. California voters send signals about what they want from their leaders. The debate over immigration enforcement, citizenship, and government accountability remains front and center. Artificial intelligence, innovation, and the future of technology continue to reshape society. And the historic sports comeback reminds us why resilience still matters. All that and more right now on This Week with Andre Stuckey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week with Andre Stuckey. I'm Andre Stuckey. Thank you for joining me. Every week, we take a step back from the headlines and examine the facts, the context, and the broader issues shaping our communities, our country, and our world. This week's stories may appear very difficult on the surface. We will discuss international conflicts, elections, immigration policy, artificial intelligence, economic challenges, and even sports. But there is one common thread connecting nearly every story we'll discuss today: leadership, how leaders respond to crisis, how institutions earn public trust, and whether those in positions of power can deliver meaningful results. Let's begin. Calls for an immediate halt to the fighting between Israel and Iran continue as concerns grow over the possibility of a broader regional conflict. I believe calls for an immediate halt to the fighting are important, but the larger reality is that this conflict did not begin overnight, and it would not be solved overnight. What often gets lost in the discussion is that both Israel and Iran view this confrontation through decades of security concerns, regional rivalries, proxy conflicts, and questions of deterrence. The real danger is not just the missiles being exchanged today, but the possibility of a wider regional war that could draw in additional nations, disrupt global energy markets, and place millions of civilians at risk. Lasting peace will require more than demands to stop shooting. It will require addressing the deeper issues that have fueled instability in the Middle East for generations. Related to that story are reports and claims involving possible military incidents involving the United States and Iran. I think this story deserves more context than a simple headline can provide. If a U.S. military aircraft was intentionally shot down by a foreign government, the key questions are where the incident occurred, what mission the aircraft was conducting, whether there was casualties, and what evidence confirms responsibility. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most strategically important waterways. Events there can affect global energy markets, international shipping, and regional stability. I believe any response should be guided by verified facts, clear objectives, and long-term national interest, because military escalation can have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate incident. From international affairs, we now turn to politics here at home, where voters continue to send important signals about the issues they care about most. As discussions begin about the future of presidential politics, attention is once again turning towards former Vice President Kamala Harris and the possibility of a 2028 campaign. I find it interesting as so much of the conversation focuses on personalities rather than the larger challenges facing the Democratic Party and the country. Name recognition and experience matter in presidential politics, but elections are often decided by whether voters believe a candidate has a compelling vision for the future. The real question is not whether Kamala Harris runs in 2028. The real question is whether any candidate can convince Americans that they have practical solutions for inflation, housing affordability, public safety, health care costs, and political divisions. Voters tend to reward candidates who offer a sense of direction and optimism, regardless of whether they are familiar faces or newcomers. The same questions voters are asking nationally are also being asked at the local level. The Los Angeles mayoral race is beginning to take shape as candidates advance and voters prepare for another important election. I think this election results say more about the future direction of Los Angeles than many headlines are focusing on. The conversation should not just be about who advanced to the runoff, but about why voters are looking for different approaches to issues like housing affordability, homelessness, public safety, infrastructure, and the cost of living. Los Angeles is one of the most influential cities in America, and the choices made by its voters often reflect broader frustrations and priorities that exist across the country. For me, the real story is whether city leadership can produce measurable results on the issues residents deal with every day. Because campaign promises matter far less than outcomes people can actually see in their neighborhoods. Those same concerns are also playing out across the state of California. Steve Hilton's advancement to the general election has sparked discussions about the future direction of California politics. I think Steve Hilton advancing to the general election says as much about voter frustration as it does about any individual candidate. Too often, the conversation focuses on party labels while ignoring the issues many Californians talk about every day: the cost of housing, affordability, public safety, homelessness, traffic congestion, and whether families feel like they have a realistic path to the middle class. What stands out to me is that California's election system often rewards candidates who can build support beyond their party base, meaning the real story may be how effectively each candidate connects with independent and dissatisfied voters. The general election will likely be less about ideology and more about which candidate convinces voters they have practical solutions to the challenges affecting everyday life. Immigration remains another issue where voters continue to demand solutions and accountability. A new immigration enforcement funding package is generating debate about border security, government spending, and accountability. I think this story is about more than just a $70 billion spending figure. The real questions are how that money will be allocated, what metrics will be used to measure success, and whether enforcement alone can address the economic and legal factors that drive migration. Border security is a legitimate responsibility of government, but taxpayers should also be asked about oversight, long-term costs, staffing, technology investments, and the impact on local communities and courts. In my view, the debate shouldn't be limited to whether someone supports or opposes immigration enforcement. It should focus on accountability, effectiveness, and whether this investment produces measurable results for the American people. A renewed debate is taking place over denaturalization and the government's authority to revoke citizenship in certain circumstances. I think this issue deserves more nuance than many headlines provide. Denaturalization is not a new power created by any administration. It has existed for decades and is generally used when the government alleges that citizenship was obtained through fraud, concealment of material facts, or other serious violations during the naturalization process. The real debate is not whether criminals should face consequences for serious offenses, but how broadly this authority should be used and what level of due process protections should exist. I believe Americans can support strong enforcement against individuals who obtain citizenship fraudulently, while also insisting that citizenship, once granted, should not be subject to arbitrary or politically motivated challenges. The balance between national security, public safety, and constitutional protection is what makes this a far more complex issue than a simple political talking point. Speaking of government responsibilities, leadership inside our national security institutions also matter. President Trump's nomination of Jay Clayton for Director of National Intelligence has generated discussion in Washington. I think this nomination deserves a deeper conversation than simply focusing on politics or personalities. The Director of National Intelligence oversees coordination among numerous intelligence agencies and helps shape how information is gathered, analyzed, and presented to policymakers. What matters most is not just Jay Clayton's legal or regulatory background, but whether he can effectively manage a massive intelligence structure, maintain analyst independence, and ensure intelligence assessments remain objective regardless of political pressure. I believe Americans should pay close attention to how any nominee plans to balance national security, civil liberties, transparency, and accountability, because those decisions can have long-term consequences that extend far beyond a single administration. Questions about accountability extend beyond government agencies and to the use of public institutions themselves. A proposed UFC fight at the White House is creating debate across the political spectrum. I think this debate is bigger than whether people support or oppose a UFC event at the White House. The White House has long been used as a stage for cultural, athletic, and public events intended to connect government with the broader public. The more important questions are how taxpayer resources are being used, what security costs will be, and whether this event serves a legitimate public purpose. At the same time, critics are right to ask whether government property should be associated with any private organization. In my view, the real issue is accountability and transparency, not simply the fact that a important event is taking place on historic grounds. For many Americans, however, the issue affecting daily life more than any other remains the economy. Inflation continues to be one of the most closely watched economic issues in the country. I think the issue about inflation deserves more context than a single headline. While geopolitical conflicts can contribute to higher energy and transportation costs, inflation is also influenced by factors such as government spending, interest rate policy, supply chain efficiency, labor costs, and consumer demand. What matters most to everyday Americans is not just the inflation itself, but whether wages, savings, and retirement income are keeping pace with rising costs. I believe policymakers should focus on long-term economic stability, energy security, and increasing domestic protection, because families feel inflation every time they buy groceries, pay rent, or fill up their gas tanks, regardless of what ultimately causes the price increase. The economy is changing rapidly, and much of that transformation has been driven by technology. OpenAI's reported plans to become a publicly traded company are generating significant discussion throughout the technology sector. I think the bigger story is not simply whether OpenAI becomes a publicly traded company, but what happens when a technology that has increasingly shaped education, business, media, and everyday decision making becomes accountable to public shareholders. An IPO can provide enormous capital for research and infrastructure, but it may also create pressure to prioritize quarterly growth and profits alongside long-term innovation and safety. The real question is whether AI companies can balance shareholder expectations, competition, transparency, and responsible developments as these systems become more influential in society. That governance challenge may ultimately matter more than the stock offering itself. Artificial intelligence is only one example of how rapidly technology is transforming the global economy. Our next story highlights another industry that could refine the future. Elon Musk reportedly becomes the world's first trillionaire, would certainly be a historic financial milestone. But I think this story is bigger than one person's becoming a trillionaire. What often gets overlooked is that most of that wealth exists on paper through ownership of company shares, not as cash sitting in the bank account. At the same time, SpaceX's valuation reflects investor confidence in industries that could shape the future, including satellite communications, space transportation, national security, and eventually commercial space development. To me, the more important conversation is what it says about modern markets when a single company can create so much value and influence. Whether people celebrate it or criticize it, this milestone highlights how technology, innovation, and private enterprises are increasingly shaping the global economy in ways governments once dominated. Our final story this week comes from the world of sports, but the lesson extends far beyond the basketball court. The New York Knicks delivered one of the most memorable comeback victories in recent memory. I think this game is more than a remarkable comeback. What often gets overlooked is how championship teams are tested by adversity, not just a talent. Erasing the 29-point deficit requires discipline, conditioning, adjustments, and a belief when most people assume the outcome is already decided. If the Knicks are truly one win away from a title, it reflects years of roster building, player development, and organizational patience rather than a single night's performance. To me, this comeback is a reminder that resilience can change the course of a season, a franchise, and potentially a city that has waited decades to celebrate another championship. As we conclude this week's program, I want to leave you with one observation. Although today's stories covered very different subjects, they were all connected by a common theme. Leadership matters. Whether we're discussing international conflicts, elections, immigration, intelligence agencies, economic policy, artificial intelligence, technological innovations, or sports, success ultimately depends on the ability of leaders and institutions to earn public trust and deliver meaningful results. The headlines may change from week to week, but the question remains the same. Are leaders solving problems? Are institutions being accountable? And are decisions being made with the long-term interest of the public in mind? Those are the questions that deserve our attention. Thank you for joining me for another edition of This Week with Andre Stuckey. If you enjoyed today's program, please like, subscribe, and share this episode. You can also follow Civic Dialogue News and This Week with Andre Stuckey for additional commentary and analysis throughout the week. I'm Andre Stuckey. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful week. This Week with Andre Stuckey, a production of Civil Dialogue News, providing commentary and analysis and discussion on the issues shaping our communities, our nation, and our world. For more content, follow Civic Dialogue News across social media platforms. Thank you for watching.